Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and I hope everyone's having a great holiday season as we continue our 12 Days of Christmas special here on the channel. And today for day 2, we have a brand new top 5 list, and this is the top 5 new free LCs or FLCs that we wish to see for the game Total War 3 Kingdoms. Now yesterday, on the first day, we talked about the 5 DLCs, and with Creative Assembly's policies in terms of how they release new Total War DLCs, with each DLC release, there's usually one free LC that's provided, and free LC basically means a free downloadable content that allows players to add a new playable factions to the base game that is often added in alongside a DLC release, so that players of the base game who choose not to purchase the new DLC still have something new in store for them with each DLC release. So the key point here is that these factions that are included as free LCs need to be playable in the 190 start. Now, if we take a look back at what we have so far in the game, there has been 3 free LC factions released. The first one being Tao Qian, which was released alongside Mandate of Heaven. Now, this was a fairly easy faction to implement as Tao Qian existed in the base game but was not playable. So basically a new mechanic was provided, some new unique units, although the unique units are pretty bad. Tao Qian's mechanic is pretty interesting as it has to do with the population that are displaced and refugees during this chaotic period. But Tao Qian as a whole has some issues where he's a bit too old, even though with the newest changes in patch 1.6, he has a very powerful faction-wide bonus with his background, where he gets 2 extra administrators. But overall, not a super interesting faction to play, but a very textbook example of what we can expect from free content. Then, with A World Betrayed, I think everyone was spoiled a bit too much when the free LC content was set as Yan Bai Hu, who is this Southern Bandit faction that did not exist in the base game. And what happened was that during the Bandit revamp, CA added this brand new faction not only to the 194 or World Betrayed start, but also was added in the 190 start retrospectively to flush out some of the southern portion of the map where it was a bit blank during the base game. So we kind of got this brand new faction added in, and everyone felt that this was a huge change because alongside it, we got the free patch change where all the bandits are revamped. So it felt like we got this brand new mechanic and a whole subculture alongside this free LC, when in fact most of the changes are really part of the patch and we just got a brand new playable character and faction with Yan Bai Hu. And in terms of his unique attributes, in terms of faction unique mechanics and faction unique units, the units are pretty interesting. We have a few ambush related units with poison arrowed raiders, and there are some interesting Yue units that comes with his unique mini buildings as part of the county. His faction mechanic of forming coalitions is a bit tough to achieve, and the reward is very little. Because if you think about research rate bonuses, you could get a lot more from building some of those mini buildings rather than going for 8 coalition, which is more of a achievement run than anything else. Then alongside the Furious Wild, which is the latest expansion pack, the first one that's not an actual chapter pack, we got Shixie added into the game. And Shixie becomes playable in the base game. He was originally on the map already, so that part's not too difficult. He got a brand new faction mechanic focused on family and diplomacy, some unique items in terms of his tributary chest, which he can trade his points for and trade them in diplomacy as value items or use them themselves to boost his characters. It's a very interesting playstyle, but unfortunately, he was not given any unique building or any unique units, which makes him feel half finished in a sense. Now, there are some arguments you could argue for that Shixie shouldn't have unique units because he didn't participate in a single battle during the entirety of the Three Kingdom period, and that's a long time for him since he lived to age 90, but from a game perspective, it would be still better to see him with some units, especially since he was close to modern-day Vietnam, and the culture was mixed under his jurisdiction. So perhaps if we had seen some mixed cultural units or retinues, auxiliary units, that would have been something the players would have wished for. But regardless, these are examples of past free LCs. So for our list here of my top 5, I'm going to stick to the rules and pick warlords or generals that are currently in the game and can be implemented during the 190 base game, which is the big hurdle, because if they can't be implemented in 190, they can only be added as part of a DLC, and it wouldn't make sense to add them as free LC. So the list is going to be constrained by that. And we're going to start things off with what I think will most likely happen according to chronological order, similar to what we did for the DLC package. So during our DLC top 5 lists, we started with the Battle of Guandu, which is around the year 200. And that was a conflict between Cao Cao and Yuan Shao. So for that conflict, I'm going to pick a general that's relevant for that time period. And the general in question here is Zhang Xiu. So Zhang Xiu is currently in the game. He starts out under Zhang Ji's faction during the World Betrayed DLC. I believe they do not exist in the 190 campaign as of right now, and they could definitely create a small faction for them. What they would need to do here is make Zhang Xiu the star of the faction, or at least make him the star of the mechanic, even though he might not take over until his uncle Zhang Ji dies. So technically, Zhang Ji might be the faction, quote unquote, that will get the free LC status, but Zhang Xiu should be the one picking up the unique model, kind of like what happened with Liu Yan and Liu Zhang out west in Shu. But Zhang Xiu is a very interesting character, and the little tagline I gave him here is Cao Cao's nightmare. And that's only for the period before Guandu. Eventually, he would join Cao Cao. So Zhang Xiu's family come from the Liang province out west. His uncle was named Zhang Ji and was part of the Liang General Corps that came in with Dong Zhuo. So Zhang Ji was kind of a general that was similar to people like Guo Si, and they kind of followed Dong Zhuo into the Chang'an. And after Dong Zhuo's death, they kind of went separate ways. And Zhang Ji and his nephew, Zhang Xiu here, kind of roamed around and eventually landed in Liu Biao's territory. And they tried to carve a piece of land for themselves there by sieging the city of Xiangyang. But during the siege, Zhang Ji died and left the faction, quote unquote, to his nephew, Zhang Xiu. And it was kind of sad that Zhang Ji died, because Zhang Ji and Liu Biao really had no conflict before that point, and Zhang Ji was just trying to get a place to stay, and Liu Biao kind of understood that. So when Zhang Ji died, Liu Biao was very nice to Zhang Xiu and said to him, you know what, we're going to give you a piece of land in Vancheng. You can have it. You'll be our vassal or coalition partner, and you help us defend the Jin province in the north from people like Cao Cao, who is hoping to invade the Jin province. So Zhang Xiu ended up with Vancheng. And in game, I believe Vancheng is where they put Nanyang's commandery capital. So it's quite a lucrative piece of land, given that you have a jade mine in your own commandery. And Zhang Xiu held that city, and he has some legendary generals under him. And by legendary, I don't mean how historically awesome they are. I mean, they're already legendary generals in the game. And the person I'm talking about is actually his strategist Jia Xu, or the strategist with a very tall hat in the game. And he was a strategist under Zhang Xiu during this time. And they battled Cao Cao, but they lost at the Battle of Wancheng. And they surrendered to Cao Cao. And when Cao Cao took over the city and accepted the surrender, he went and decided to sleep with Zhang Xiu's aunt, or the widow of Zhang Ji, and this triggered Zhang Xiu. So during that night, that's the famous event where Cao Cao lost his son, lost one of his nephews, and lost Dian Wei and his Shadowrunner horse in the same night, as Zhang Xiu's army kind of ambushed Cao Cao in the middle of the city when Cao Cao thought they had full control and received the surrender of Zhang Xiu already. So that's Zhang Xiu's role right before the Battle of Guandu. Now you might think, if Zhang Xiu betrayed Cao Cao there, how did he eventually join Cao Cao later on? Well, the funny thing is, after they chased Cao Cao out of the city during that ambush, they failed to kill him because Cao Cao's nephew gave up his horse for him. Cao Cao's son gave up the horse for him just to get Cao Cao out. They died. Dian Wei held the door and got slaughtered. And at the end of the day, Cao Cao escaped and regrouped with his main force. So Zhang Xiu still had no chance holding on one city against the force of everything Cao Cao had under his control. So eventually Zhang Xiu was going to lose. And Jia Xu recommended to him that Cao Cao is a man with big heart and big ambitions, so he wouldn't mind accepting your surrender if it provides advantages in the grand scheme of things, even if you cause the death of his oldest son. So that's a big gamble. And Zhang Xiu accepted it and sent Jia Xu to negotiate this. And Cao Cao was indeed, like Jia Xu said, a man who's willing to overlook some of this and openly accepted Zhang Xiu and made him a general under his army too. And Jia Xu was a strategist under Cao Cao, so that's when Jia Xu transferred hands. And once that happened, what happened with Zhang Xiu was he became a general that fought during the Battle of Guandu under Cao Cao. So you can make him a vassal faction in the game, I believe, and it will work very well. They can make a vassal mechanic, which would be very cool in my opinion, because you want a faction that incentivizes you to be a vassal. I think you need more mechanics like that in the game, because later on, if you split one of these big kingdoms into subjects or vassals, you want some incentive for the player to not break from their lord and play their own story. Similar to how Liu Biao has jurisdiction, kind of constrain you to play tall and make vassals, perhaps you can have a mechanic for either Zhang Ji or Zhang Xiu here so that they stay a vassal and they get benefits when they stay a vassal. Because they can start out 190 as a vassal to Dong Zhuo, which will be historically correct. And when Dong Zhuo falls, you can feel free to break apart, and then you fall under Liu Biao as a vassal. And when you decide to fall under Cao Cao as a vassal, you can just keep jumping and gain benefits along the way. And Zhang Xiu did very well during the Battle of Guandu, to the point where he got a second marquis title. Cao Cao decided to marry one of his sons with Zhang Xiu's daughter. So this guy who, caused the direct death of Cao Cao's heir, Cao Ang, eventually became in-laws with Cao Cao. But unfortunately, during the campaign against the Wuhan tribes in 207, there was a very long and difficult march in the north, and Zhang Xiu died of sickness on that march, alongside a famous strategist, Guo Jia, who also died in that march. So that campaign against the Wuhuan, even though it was a great victory for Cao Cao, he lost a lot of generals to just terrain conditions and climate, and that includes Zhang Xiu. So his story historically ends around 207. So if he's going to get introduced, because his storyline at the Battle of Wancheng is very rich, you end up killing a lot of main characters in the game because of his storyline and the fact that he has some legendary generals under him and the vassal mechanic that could be possible with him. I feel like he could be a very cool free LC character. And he already has a semi-unique background, Read in the Wind, and that could perhaps reflect his vassal status, swaying to either side. And we could see him going forward as his own faction. That would be quite neat. So that's the first one on my list, not because that's the one I want to see the most, but that's the one that I think could get featured in the Battle of Guandu. Then moving on, we have someone that everyone probably already expects since the launch of the game, and that's Han Sui. And Han Sui's tagline here is Rebel for Life. And that's kind of like his in-game tagline too. He has tireless insurgent, and he really is. He's the one in the Qiang region who never surrendered. Ma Teng eventually got a cushy office job with Cao Cao, but Han Sui didn't. Han Sui worked on Ma Teng's son and convinced him to go to war against Cao Cao, which resulted in Ma Teng's death. But regardless, this is the real Qiang faction of the sorts. Ma Teng gets a lot of shine because his son, Ma Chao, had a lot of shine in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms because he eventually joined Liu Bei, the honorable, righteous protagonist Liu Bei. Therefore, Ma Chao got a lot of shine, so a lot of games uplift Ma Teng. even though Ma Teng is not as impressive as Han Sui, in my opinion, out of the entire Liang rebel group. If we have to kind of put Han Sui and Ma Teng as peers because they were kind of sworn brothers for a period before their relationship soured, I believe of the two, Han Sui is the much more impressive character of the two. So if anyone becomes playable with a heavy Qiang flair, I hope it is Han Sui rather than Ma Teng, and I hope he doesn't get a governor status. I hope he gets to be kind of a warlord or nomadic type of Qiang faction that plays a bit differently. Now, there's not too much to add about his historical lore. We kind of know it. He plays a big role in multiple campaigns as this partner in crime with Ma Teng, and his in-game start would be very cool because he starts out all in the corner of the map. I think he will be great for the Northern Expansion DLC because if we get a map extension in the north, he will be featured pretty prominently there, and he can have some sort of maybe nomadic relationship as his faction mechanic where he can deal with the other tribes that might get introduced, whether they're the Xiongnu tribes, the Wuhan tribes, or the Xianbei tribes, or even the Qiang tribes to the west, which I don't know if we're going to see in a northern expansion or not. But that's definitely a direction that I think he could use, and he could get a lot of nomadic cavalry under his command from maybe various cultures instead of just saying Qiang units. And he personally is a Han general. They were both captains. Han Sui and Ma Teng were both captains that betrayed their leader when it seemed like the entire Xiliang region was lost, and they became rebels themselves under Bianzhang. And then when Bianzhang died, they became kind of independent warlords themselves. So Han Sui, I think everyone expect to eventually be playable, and it'll be quite interesting to have someone at the far edge of the map, especially if we get expansion into the northwest, into the Hexi corridor. That might be interesting, although that might be a little unbalanced from a game perspective. Like, no one's really going to want to march an army to that northwest corner beyond Wei if it has to keep going in a narrow corridor with very little rewards. Because unless you move, some very valuable animal tamers there, no player is really going to be incentivized to conquer that edge of the map, especially if you don't start out anywhere close to it. Then moving on for our third free LC, we have another expected character, and I think a very interesting character in Zhang Lu, who in game is called the Celestial Master, and the tagline here for him is the Taoist Kingdom, because Zhang Lu actually successfully created something that perhaps the Yellow Turbans envisioned. He ruled his jurisdiction in Hanzhong as a Taoist kingdom. He was the Celestial Master, which is Tianshi in Chinese. And if you want to know his story there, I have a lore series on the channel, a 2-episode special, so it's rather short, about Zhang Lu's family, how they formed a special Taoist sect out west, and how they used that sect to kind of rule their kingdom in a similar fashion where everyone donated a certain amount of rice to the community, and they had community service for crimes, and there's a forgiveness system where when you make a crime, instead of you go to jail, you perform some community service. And he kind of had a very Taoist kingdom here in Hanzhong, and he played a big role in multiple parts of the Three Kingdom, whether that's with conflict with Liu Zhang early on, where he was a vassal until Liu Yan died and he broke away. And later on, he took in Ma Chao and did battle with Liu Bei. And then he eventually became a vassal for Cao Cao. So he had interactions with multiple members of the Three Kingdom, and he holds a very key choke in the mountain passes in Hanzhong. So we could see a pretty cool character with some Taoist flair, or maybe this hybrid Yellow Turban and Han faction that kind of shares unit from both, or perhaps can recruit generals from both. That would be really cool to see if you can introduce a mechanic where the subculture isn't so well defined. That way we can liberate some generals like Liao Hua into the regular rosters. It will be a great thing to see. So this is Zhang Lu. Then someone very closely related to Zhang Lu for our number 4 spot is going to be Liu Yan, who is the opportunist ruler. Now, he might not seem so obvious, but his son, Liu Zhang is someone that everyone's very familiar with and already has a unique model in the game. So I think if Liu Yan becomes the free LC character, since he's the leader during 190, everyone can accept that because Liu Zhang would just take over and they should have a very similar isolationist playstyle. Because during 184, what happened was Liu Zhang saw the Yellow Turban threat. He was working in the capital at the time. He is a distant relative to the emperor. You can tell by the last name. And he saw that the Yellow Turban in the country was creating this chaos. And he heard a rumor from the astronomers of the court saying that the land of Shu has this aurora that can create emperors. So he thought he could ask the emperor to grant him a governorship, which was a new position. There was no governors of provinces. There was just prefect, which had no real military power. It's a very soft role in the government, just kind of a management overseer type supervisor of administrators. But he advised Liu Hong that the country was weak and he needed to rely on his relatives like himself to become these more powerful governors into these provinces to take care of them. And he kind of recommended himself to head to the Yi province, which is made up of the Shu region and the Ba region out west. So he got his job in 184. Obviously, the emperor kept two of his sons in the capital. So he only brought his third son, Liu Zhang, with him. And he didn't really like that son. And once he got into Shu, he didn't really care about his two other sons either. He cut off all the postal routes and kind of isolated himself. And he played a very heavy isolationist role. Now, of course, once he isolates himself inside the Shu region, the court knows something's wrong, and both of his older sons got executed, which caused a physical, mental reaction within himself, and he eventually died from sickness developed from mourning for his sons, and Liu Zhang took over. And once Liu Zhang takes over, around 194, I want to say, what happened was that Liu Zhang kind of did very well in developing his land. There was multiple threats. There was the Dong family, who was a big player in the region because people lived in the Yi province before they got there to be governor. The imperial government sends this new guy, say he's your governor. He doesn't get all the power right away. You have local clans who's been there for hundreds of years, and you have a bunch of tribes, including a lot of Qiang tribes that are very violent and against Han rule. So it took them a while to gain full control, and Liu Zhang kind of did that. But eventually we know that when Liu Bei came into the Shu region, Liu Zhang eventually surrendered, as I believe in the game he's called Proponent of Peace. So hopefully we'll get a way to play their story in a different fashion, because you do get to start out in Shu, and that's a very interesting start, as many people even play 8 Princes for the Sima Ying start out in Shu, and it's quite interesting because now with the Nanman factions down south, it's actually a bit challenging in the beginning, or else it's just very fertile land with an armor smith and weaponsmith in the same region, and you have rivers for trade, harbor, spice that's near if you go south, and silk that's near if you go north. So very great start and very interesting faction. I'm hoping for isolationist mechanic as a faction mechanic. And for units, you can give them some interesting archer units, whether they're the E archers, which Liu Bei already has, because think about it, E province, E archers, that's the unit they should be getting. Or you can take this chance to add some veteran troops. Liu Bei had these veterans that were called the White Ear veterans because they wore a white feather. So I guess white feather veterans play better. You can probably implement them here, just make them region based. Or you can wait till Liu Shan gets his own unique units. You can do that then. And then other units in this region, you have hybrid Nanman units that were called Feibing, or like the flying units, because they were very fast in the mountain region. Perhaps they can get these because they're kind of also this region base. Or you can also go with the Zhuge Liang route with the repeating crossbowmen. But since he's a strategist in the game, if they keep that, some range units would be nice. And if they're really lazy and don't want to spend too much asset on free LC, then just give them the E archers and then give more units to Liu Bei in future DLCs, similar to how when Sun Ce got new units, Sun Jian also got new units as well, with the Tiger Guards and the Handmaiden Guards. So that's going to be Liu Yan. And then for our final one, this one's a bit tough to find someone else that can exist in a 190 with something interesting in terms of start. But I ended up settling on Liu Yao, who already has a model in the game. Now he is a tertiary character in the game, or according to their definition of tertiary character, where you can't play him in custom battle, and he has the model, but you can't really use him. But he can be upgraded, and Liu Yao has a very interesting backstory. He's the brother of Liu Dai, who is also in the game, and he's a distant relative to the emperor. He had many feats in his youth where he went undercover to rescue one of his uncles under a bandit camp, where he kind of dressed as a bandit, went undercover, rescued the uncle, fought his way out of the bandit camp, was pretty capable as an administrator, went down south, went toe-to-toe with the likes of Yuan Shu and Sun Ce, before ultimately falling to Sun Ce, which is understandable. No one really stands up a chance to Sun Ce anyways. And he has a very simple tagline here, the Danyang Dream, because you start out in potentially a top 2 commanderies in the game. So your economy is solid, and he will make for a pretty good governor faction in the game. You could perhaps give him some naval themed unique unit. Not that there will be naval battles, but maybe some type of marine units or some type of pirate unit, or defecting pirates that became Han units, because we have defecting Han units for the Yellow Turban, so I don't see why we can't have some sort of pirate unit that becomes a regular unit, because people like Gunning essentially went that route. So that's it for us. There's probably other potential targets, especially new ones that are not in the game that can get added in completely new, like Yanbaihu, because there's a lot of other bandit factions down south that they could use if they want to go down that route, or they could maybe pull a minor character that fits a certain chapter pack's time period a bit better. For the purpose of our list here, I just picked ones that are already in the game, who are very likely or has something interesting to offer, whether it's starting locations or historical fits with time periods that I expect to see in future DLCs or expansion pack. Like if they do a northern expansion pack, Hansui seems like the obvious choice to go for. Now there could be others down the line, but these are the 5 that I'm going to be settling on. And hopefully if we get more DLCs, we get more free LCs. So everyone wins here. And that's going to do it for us with today's episode. And we'll come back tomorrow and talk about some potential new units that I want to see added into the game. So that's it for us. See you guys then. Bye.